What do robots, jellybeans, and getting angry at your computer have in common? This isn't the start of a shitty joke, but if it were, you would be the punchline, because those three things taught me how to manipulate you. Let me clarify. My doctoral dissertation was on persuasive human-robot interaction. This guy right here. I think there's a few marks on it from when I threw it across the room once, but I digress. I basically looked at the ways in which machines can influence, motivate, and at times manipulate you. And really, there were three really grounding things that pushed through when I ultimately pulled together my research from 4 years in the PhD. One I've talked about before. In the mid-90s, there was research going on at Stanford that came to be known as the media equation. Their experiments were dead simple. They had people walk into a room and do a really boring file renaming type task on a desktop computer. While they were doing the task, the computer would pop up these vaguely social messages. Go us, or aren't we a great team? Keep up the good work. And then at the end of the task, that person would be asked to give their feedback in one of two conditions. They'd either give their feedback on the same machine they just worked on, or an identical machine just a meter or two down the way on the desk. And what the researchers found was that when people gave feedback on the other machine, they were far more critical of the original computer. Think about that for a second. They were, reluctant to hurt the computer's feelings to its face, but they'll happily talk shit about it behind its back to its buddy. This was such a strange and interesting phenomenon that the research also became known as CASA, or computers as social actors. Because what Reeves and Nass found was that we human beings are so hardwired for social connection that we'll sometimes forego reality to play along with a scenario that doesn't really make sense, like thinking a computer has feelings, kind of like we do. Now, years later, I would run some of my own experiments, such as the now infamous, at least for me, Jellybean experiments. Again, dead simple, similar to the media equation. I had people step up to a table and look at a jar full of jellybeans and try to guess the number of jellybeans in a jar, with a little bit of a twist. While they were standing there counting and guessing and making their estimations, one robot would pop up on either side of the jar and try and influence them with some sort of persuasive strategy. They'd use things like rational logic, my computer vision system can detect 783 jellybeans in the jar. Or maybe they'd use exclusivity. Psst, don't tell anyone I told you this, but there's actually 512 jellybeans in the jar. However, far and away, the most effective strategy out of the 12 or so that I compared was an emotional strategy. It would make me happy if you use my guess of 633 jellybeans in a jar. Now, this threw my poor little engineering brain for a bit of a loop. Why were people playing along with a robot claiming to have emotions, even in some cases where they would look this thing in the eyes and say, you're a robot, you don't have emotions, but still use its estimate? Well, you see, in the same way that people in the media equation experiments didn't want to hurt those computers' feelings, people in my experiments wanted this opportunity to make those robots happy. Emotion is a hell of a drug, and when you're able to play on that, even if you yourself don't have emotion, even if you're a cold calculating machine, you can do a potential lot of damage, or a lot of good, depending on how you frame it. Now, I struggled with this kind of research. Kept me up at night. I had ethical questions that really went back and forth, and ultimately I decided, though, to publish this stuff because it was better off out in the world where we could be openly discussing it as opposed to hiding it behind closed doors. It also would have been foolish for me to think that this kind of research wasn't already going on at Facebook or Google or otherwhere. And so instead, what I wanted to do was put this kind of information out in the world to allow you to make an informed decision about if and how you'll use these kinds of technologies. So the next time you're using some sort of technology that seems to be persuading you or motivating you, stop for a second and ask yourself how it's doing that. Is it doing it authentically? Is it manipulating you in ways that you're not totally comfortable with? And just make sure that you're aware and going into these kinds of interactions with your eyes open.